Hi, so I want to share with you my Theory to Practice project that I created for this class. And what I did was I altered a project I've done in the past with my students based on the research that I did here. And that is a project based on Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. So the big objectives of this project are they are pulled from the Common Core, and they involve a few things. So one is looking at vocabulary, so determining unknown words, because the vocabulary in this poem is pretty challenging. So they can use context clues. They also need to be able to look at figurative language and try to determine why and how that is used as well. Students will provide an objective summary of a portion of the text. And like I mentioned, they will have to look at figurative language and how Poe uses language in this poem. They also create a presentation based on their findings, and this means they need to use multimedia, and they are going to also need to be able to collaborate with each other. So this is a partner-based project, and part of what this does is help students learn how to work with each other. So before we read the poem, I give them some very general, basic background knowledge on the poem, that it's a narrative poem, and that it tells a story. So it's much like other Poe stories we've read in that way, but it is written in verse. So we listen to it. There are some initial questions that students answer just to make sure they understand the general story of the poem before we go any further. And for fun, we also watch The Simpsons version of The Raven. This really helps them understand the poem because it is very challenging. So then what we do is we need to start prepping for the project. So the final project is a presentation based on an analysis of a single stanza of the poem. So part of their expectations of this project is to look at literary devices and how Poe uses them in the poem. So in a partnership, they work together to uncover the use of some of these literary devices. There are quite a few that I asked them to look at, and I'll show you that in a second. And they will work together to try to figure out what these literary devices are, and they will do an activity with each one as well. So they have a worksheet that they work on which they record some answers and work in a partnership sort of as prep work for the final project. So for example, they would have some work to do on alliteration. So I'm giving them the definition. So alliteration is the repetition of initial consonant sounds in neighboring words. And so they're given an example here of alliteration. And this is one that I wrote. So I'm trying to show them that this is something they can do themselves as well. And so then what they're asked to do on a worksheet is to find their own example of alliteration in the poem, and then take that alliteration of Poe's and add any additional words that would continue that line logically that also would be alliterative. So it's good practice for them to try to get a handle on each of these literary devices that they will have to eventually choose from to incorporate in their final presentation. So they look at several other literary devices as well, so imagery, assonance, metaphor, onomatopoeia, internal rhyme, simile, consonants, and those are the literary devices that they work on. So, and with each of these you'll see here, so for consonants, same thing. So they have a little project to do with it that's pretty basic, and that is example for consonants: to write 2 sentences on any topic that includes at least 3 words that create consonants. So this then will show me that they are absorbing this definition of consonants and are able to produce an example of their own. So this is great practice for them for what the next step is going to be. So day 2, they come in and we do a hot seat game with the literary devices. So that is a game in which I split the class into 2 teams, and each team sends up a representative, and that person needs to try to guess the word that's on the screen behind them based on clues that their teammates give to them. So students don't, there isn't a real prize for this. but they really get into the competition of it. It gets pretty intense, and it really helps me understand who does and does not understand the terms as well in a more informal way. So then once they have those literary devices under their belt, and they have that worksheet that they created themselves, that have all the definitions, that have their examples of it, then we go on to introduce what the project is going to be. So the final project is a close read screencast. So it's very close to what I'm doing right now. Is a screencast. They do a recording of their screen, and on that screencast they will share an analysis of a stanza of The Raven with their classmates. So it has 3 elements in it. So one is they need to write a summary of the stanza. So what is literally taking place in that stanza of the poem. They need to identify 2 literary devices that Poe uses based on that list that they just worked from, and then they also identify 2 unique, interesting vocabulary words and analyze those and their use and purpose as well. Okay, so what I do, and I will not play this for you, but this is, I found to be a really great step to include, and that is I created my own screencast of what I would like the final project to look like and what I would like it to sound like. And I share this with them before they even start working. So based on the research that I did, modeling is a great way to get students set off on the right foot so that they know what they should be looking at. So I play this for them, and they jot some notes down about what do they notice this analysis includes. So I already introduced it a little bit, but I want them to notice more in detail. What do they see that I'm doing in this analysis that they will have to also do? So I found this was really successful, and I shared this with students as well. They could listen to this again on their own if they'd like to, beyond the one time we listened to it in class together, if they need to. And there were definitely positive outcomes based on this modeling. So then we went through and started the actual work. So once they're put in their partnerships that were definitely based on ability level, I tried to pair lower student with a higher student because this is a very challenging task. So they would then are given a Google Doc into which they copy and paste the stanza of their poem. They write that summary together. So we go through a little mini lesson on how to write that summary, what that summary looks like based on the modeling. They need to look up any and all unfamiliar words. This is helping them get ready for that vocabulary step. They then identify and define and explain 2 literary devices. So they're reminded to use that worksheet that they created the day before. So they have that reference sheet, they're reminded to use it, and then they choose 2 of the words that they found to be unfamiliar or 2 other impactful or interesting words, and they need to define and explain them as well. So if time allows, they can check in with me and start working on a script. Typically that doesn't happen on day 2. So here's what their sheet looks like. So this is a Google Doc that's shared with them, and then the partnership can work together and both help each other out. So they copy and paste their stanza here. Here's where they work on that summarizing, and here is where they break down how to analyze the literary devices. So they put the device name here, they put the definition back in, they copy and paste the lines that have the device, and then this is the most challenging part. How does it impact the poem? How does it add meaning or interest to the poem? So this helps break down their thinking. So graphic organizers are a key part of everything I do in my class, and this is one that I created custom for this very project. So then the other thing they do is something similar with the vocabulary words. So they put the word here, here's the definition that they find, here are the lines that contain that word, and then this is the challenging part. How does it impact it? So why would Poe choose this specific word? So if a different word was chosen, how would it change the meaning? So this is where the partnership really needs to discuss and work together to sort this out. None of it is straightforward. So day 3, when they come in, then we look over the rubric because they're getting very close to the end of the project. This is about a 4-day project. So we go through this, and it's created as a checklist on purpose so students can literally go through and check everything off as they are working. So do they, in their screencast, they will need to know they need to read their stanza out loud first. They need to know that their stanza is accurate and thorough. So do they identify 2 literary devices and include all 3 of those elements that are on the graphic organizer? And then the same, are there 2 vocabulary words they look at? Are they defining them? Are they just explaining their impact? And then finally in the recording, we're starting to get closer to that. So do both students speak about the same amount? Does it sound practiced? Is the tone engaging? Do they sound fluent? And does the general format of the whole screencast recording flow nice and smoothly, or is it choppy? And then lastly, a few things we talk about that help make a better presentation as well. So students need to highlight literally in their Google Doc as they are speaking. So in the recording, you will see their cursor highlighting words. That will make it easy for the audience to follow. So is their volume nice and easy to hear? And finally, do they upload their screencast accurately so that we can actually watch it? Or do they make an error there as well? All right, so then here's what their plan would be. So this would be up on the screen while they are working this day. So they need to check in their homework essentially with me. They need to start writing a script based on everything that was in that Google document. So this is where the partnership really needs to come together and start deciding how they want to communicate this information. So they need to divide their lines up. We do a nice mini lesson on transitions, which is a weak point of theirs. They need to figure out how to make it interesting and conversational sounding. So we look at another student example in a moment. And they need to check in before printing just so we can make sure that everything is ready to go. So once they check in with me and I make sure they have transitions, they have some interesting side comments and ways to make it sound like a conversation written into the script, then they are allowed to print, and then they should practice. So they need to practice, practice, practice. They don't record on day 3. They're strictly practicing. So they should sound conversational, but still serious and academic. They need to practice that highlighting, so that's a nice hand-eye coordination bit of practice as well. So I give them a guideline on time. It should be about 2.5 or 3 minutes. And then lastly, they should review that rubric and make sure they're really getting everything ready. I share with them a brief video tutorial on how to do the Screencastify. It's just a web app. It's one they've used before, so we don't watch this together in class, but they can watch it on their own if they need to. And then here is what the final day is. So this is day 4 when they come in. So usually we will look at a student sample one last time. So watch that recording, listen to it, double check that we have all the elements that we need, and then they need to practice some more, make sure they go over that rubric one last time. You can't do that enough. And then they record. So they should test their recording to make sure the volume is good, and then listen back to it and double check their rubric, because there usually is time in class to re-record if they need to. So then they need to upload that shareable link to Schoology, and then there is just another activity if time allows. Okay, so these are those final directions that I would leave up on the screen. So this is just something I always find helpful. So I always have directions on the screen when there's work times, so they know exactly what they should be doing and the order in which they should be doing it, so there's no mystery. So this slide is usually, the slide before is what I would go over in class, and then this is what's up on the screen, so they know exactly what the active verbs are of what they need to be doing before they move on. So the last thing we do on the very last day is I ask them to watch 2 of their classmates' screencasts and give some feedback. So what did you learn from viewing it? So think about what they talk about in terms of content and in terms of literary devices. So, and then in terms of delivery, what was done well, and then